sure enough, we are seeing it in various states. Is that something that's one of the premises of the discussion in general? How do we all feel about that? I mean, I'm not a legal expert. I don't know how any of this stuff happens, but it seems that when we speak to 4 or 5 chiropractors in a row who say, "Oh, it's coming," because it happened for us, and it happened for us 20 years ago, and this is how painful it was. And this is what you're going to have to do. Is that resonant with us? Are we listening to that? Is it true? I don't even know. This is what I've heard.
I've talked to Ron and Diane about it, and they don't think that it's coming, actually.
Why not?
Because Diane, she went to shiatsu school, and they tried to get themselves regulated by the government, and the government would not do it. And so she feels that it's not something that the government is going to regulate. And then, the idea about injuries, I find it a little bit touchy because it's like people don't just get injured in yoga. Like, what about CanPro? I'm asking, this is actually a question. Is that regulated by the government, or is that a body that... Because I'm just curious, those are personal trainers. They deal with the same, it's this idea, if we're talking about injuries and we're talking about the physical aspect of the practice of yoga, right? And worried about people getting injured. And so I don't know if that is something that's regulated by the government or if that's just them, they regulate themselves or something. But it's sort of along the same lines where it's like you have somebody who's showing you how to do something that could possibly injure them. And if it hasn't been regulated, why not?
Does anybody have any information on that?
I don't know.
Clear information on? I mean, I imagine that it's organized in terms of levels of practice. That as you head more towards physiotherapy and kinesiology, that.
But this, I don't know. It's sort of like I made a comment last time about with yoga, right? Like, okay, I think from what I think anyways, is that being a yoga teacher is much different than being somebody who's a chiropractor, right? In terms of years of study, intensity of study, and is that something that you think that yoga teaching should go towards? I don't know. I think it's very different.
Are you saying that chiropractic is much more complicated than yoga instruction?
Well, it's like people go to school you have to get a university degree, and then you also have to go to school for 4 years. It's 8 years of full-time school before you can be certified by the government. I think it's different. I might be wrong, or maybe yoga should be that much schooling. I don't know.
I agree that it's different, absolutely,
yeah. Okay.
and I do think that's true. I think that probably what's created the occurrence in the States where it is happening is that when you look on the sites of studios, and I think I mentioned this in September, there are sort of claims like yoga's good for this or yoga's good for that and it will heal this or it can help heal that. We're asking people to insure us in case someone gets injured and they come after us. So if we're saying that we're not chiropractors, we're not at that level, we don't provide that kind of instruction or that kind of, then I feel like we're sending 2 different messages.
I guess what I'm trying to get at right now is the idea that it sort of keeps coming back to this idea about regulation. Matthew, you keep coming back to this regulation and sort of keep saying that it's coming. And
no,
so,
I'm asking. I introduced it again, and I said I don't know.
Okay.
That's one of our premises.
This is sort of like that's what I'm sort of addressing. I'm not saying what other people are claiming it's good for or whatever. I'm just sort of saying about, when you compare yoga to being a chiropractor or these kinds of things, I think it's different. And so, some yoga studios are claiming that yoga's good for a nice bum, right? Like this is what some people are marketing, right? And so, there's all of this kind of stuff, and I think it's unfortunate that these things it's being marketed that way, but we're not going to market it that way, right? And I do think that it's good for people, and I think that in everything that is good for people, there is also a place where it's, people are going to be doing it incorrectly, and they're going to be hurting people, whether it's teaching people how to swim or run or do yoga or whatever it is,
I think that I'm Lauren. Sorry, hi. Earlier you had said that, yoga is a business and that, we sort of acquiesce to the things that the students want. And yesterday I heard a student say to a teacher that was coming in to teach after me, "I want you to kill me." Luckily, she responded in a very responsible way to that comment. But if we do continue to, give people what they want, then I think there is more of a risk of injury. If that's what they want and we give that to them, then I think that that's, could be dangerous.
I guess where I'd like to add is as someone in another health-related profession, I'm an acupuncturist, so and we're right on the cusp of regulation, so it's kind of an interesting perspective, and I know a lot about shiatsu as well, and the other professions like massage therapy and chiropractic that do have regulation. I think a lot of it comes down to how organized can we be as a group, and I think the case of shiatsu was that there was just too many differing schools of thought that the government just gave up on them. They said, you guys, when you're ready, work it out, and then come back and we'll look at this again. And I think a similar thing did happen 15 years ago with acupuncture, but now it's sort of like, okay, we can find enough common ground. But if we're going to compare yoga to other forms of therapy that have been regulated, I guess first thing is maybe we need to assess, like, are we saying that yoga is a therapeutic form? Because if we can't agree on that, then there's not the comparison to other forms of therapy are difficult. So I mean that's what I hear coming out of you if we're talking about like sculpting buns and things, So it's so if it is a form of therapy, I think at minimum, massage therapy, which is a 2-year kind of commitment in most regulated schools, that I think we're sort of at least on par, if not. Depends on the level of training, but it's hard to compare. But I think there's a number of things that I think would be interesting to talk about in terms of regulation.
Can I add one thing about the comparison? One of the thoughts that I have is that as more trainees graduate and as yoga culture becomes more compressed in a way, that it is taking on more of a therapeutic track. People are beginning to distinguish themselves as offering various forms of therapy through yoga, and whether that's a function of market pressure and people distinguishing themselves, or it's people speaking from their own training. But that's the way I see it going. Is that there will be group classes, and more as we progress over the next decades, there will be more and more private type, more therapeutically based, probably home offered sources of yoga for people. What do people think about that? I can't see it going any other way but towards personalization. And when it becomes more personal, perhaps even less studio-based, it's going to be more therapeutic.
Sorry, Matthew. What do you mean? Like you mean the evolution of yoga in general, or?
As an offering of a practice to the culture, mm-hmm. as it becomes more common. What I'm seeing is that people are asking for more specific results from it. Mm-hmm. And then teachers to distinguish themselves, are pursuing more and more graduate training, more and more therapeutic training. More and more people are studying things called yoga therapy, which is a huge and messily defined, series of practices. And I think that just the conglomeration of the numbers of teachers is going to push people towards, continued education and expression that way.
Well, I just want to add that in terms of, I mean, maybe this is just complicating the discussion. This isn't necessarily my opinion on it, but that there's also a track, if we're talking about popularity and continuing demand, of yoga as a form of fitness. So that's, maybe just counterbalancing yoga as a form of therapy, and that some of those points were raised earlier about how yoga has increased in popularity and branding, and a lot of that. I mean, if you look at the classes that are the busiest, they're not really necessarily with your exception with yoga nidra, but the classes that are the busiest are not the ones that focus on necessarily the therapeutic aspects or meditation, or some of it's the ones that focus on fitness at this stage. So it might be that it evolves into that.
I'm just thinking that more and more people will have to make claims to distinguish themselves, and the vocabulary for those claims is there in the field of yoga therapy, which is called itself a therapy. I'm sorry, but you wanted to speak.
Hi, I'm Emma.
Yeah.
I just want to say a couple of things. One thing that I wanted to say is in regards to injury, I think something that I've noticed, I've been using Passport to Prana to do kind of covert classes at other studios. One thing that I think is problematic for me is going to what is called an all levels class, which I would assume a beginner student is welcome to attend. And having a class structure which is set up at what I would consider to be quite an advanced level class, and not very many modifications offered, and sort of an assumption that everybody in the class is there for fitness, as we are sort of assuming in this room. There is studios, in my opinion, within Toronto that do offer forms of yoga that are not focused entirely on fitness, and that offer a class structure that allows for a wide variety of people to attend and not feel alienated from the practice. I also think in terms of yoga therapy and having things become more privatized, that becomes, again, for me, problematic, because it's a function of people having money and being able to afford to have private instructor come to their home. I think as instructors, we should be able to offer within a group setting enough of a breadth of practice that students can take something home for themselves and be able to utilize that within their own body and within their own home. And as a teacher, if I only am able to teach a posture a certain way and not offer any modification, it may not be because I'm a bad teacher. It may just be a result of not having been taught that in a training, or not having that experience or whatnot. But I think, like any other profession, if we are working with people in a potentially injurious way, we have to acknowledge that, and we have to find ways to either be more clear about the levels of classes, or be offering people more modification. Because what I've seen, that's not happening from what I've seen in a number of places, and that is one thing where I think regulation may